Hi, I'm Jenny Guest, and I'm the tutor for Japanese at Queen's. For the Japanese course, I teach some required courses in classical Japanese language and literature, as well as options related to that area. So like many of the smaller courses in Oxford, Japanese actually organises its teaching centrally for the most part. So your choice of college won't really affect the teaching that you can access. Regardless, you'll probably have some tutorials at other colleges, as well as some at Queen's, and the language classes will mostly be organised in the faculty. To talk a bit about the kind of content and structure of the Japanese course. So this is a 4-year course. It's quite intensive in terms of modern Japanese language. In the first year, students have around 10 hours a week of language teaching. And this is partly to get everybody up to speed for the second year, which is spent abroad in Kobe, Japan. Then in years 3 and 4, students return to Oxford and continue their studies of modern as well as then classical Japanese. In the course of the first year, students are also pursuing lectures and tutorials on a range of topics related to Japanese history and culture. And these are led by specialists in each subject area. So you'll be reading through a sort of list of suggested readings and preparing an essay every other week, and then having a tutorial where you can discuss that topic with a few other students plus a specialist in the area. In years 3 and 4, the focus shifts more towards options that you get to choose. So there's quite a long list of possible options related to Japanese studies, Japanese art, linguistics, literature, history, politics, economics, society. So at any given point in time, you'll probably have 1 or 2 hours a week of option tutorials, again focused around essays that you write and prepare, as well as some lectures related to that topic. And then you'll have the modern and classical Japanese language classes, and also probably some text translation tutorials or classes, so working on the skill of translating various types of Japanese into English. For me, teaching in Oxford and at Queen's is a really wonderful chance to teach small groups of highly motivated students and to kind of together read and discuss some fascinating works of literature, both in translation and, more excitingly, in the original language. So my own research area is the reception of classical Chinese texts in pre-modern Japan and how literary education worked in that period. So I'm really interested in how people used various kinds of script and language in creative ways. And this often involves looking at the visual and material forms of the texts as well as their content in some depth. I think tutorial teaching is a really good way to take this sort of deep dive into a text. I've certainly learned a lot over the years from the questions and the insights of students. And it's a model of learning that really allows you to get to know a literary work in some depth. In terms of what we look for in applicants, there really aren't any secrets or surprises here. You can find the selection criteria for the course on the faculty's admissions website. But to sort of explain the qualities a little bit more, interviewers will look for signs of motivation, so determination to tackle this sort of course. The workload is manageable, but it is significant, and the course is designed for people that really do want to learn a lot about Japanese language and Japanese studies while they're here. So it would be good to try and demonstrate that. Also intellectual curiosity. So is an applicant driven by certain questions or kind of areas of curiosity about the subject? Are there things they really want to learn while they're on the course? So this might be obvious advice, but I think for your own benefit, as well as with an eye to the admissions process, it's a really good idea to think carefully and in some detail about whether this sort of course is something you want to spend 4 years doing, and if so, why? What would you be hoping to gain from it? So another quality that comes up is aptitude for language learning. And this would be the sorts of analytical skills that are necessary to tackle linguistic systems and also visual systems, I'm thinking of the Japanese writing system, that are very different from English. There are various ways that somebody might demonstrate these qualities, and we are often asked whether we prefer students to have learned some Japanese already, or if we have a kind of required language level. And the honest answer there is that we don't have a preference. So we do often admit students with no Japanese background at all, who've never had the chance to study it, or who have studied a bit informally, like self-study, and as well as students that have studied Japanese for years in school. So we're aware that schools vary a lot in what kinds of languages they offer, and that self-study as well, people might have access to different resources. So we're really happy to work with students that have a wide range of backgrounds to do with Japanese, and to make sure that they get to a good language level where they really can then use their Japanese for advanced research, like a dissertation in the final year. One thing we do prefer is that students ideally have some experience studying a language other than their first language. So, some sort of experience of formal language study, hopefully, so that they have some idea what they're getting into and can kind of talk critically about or analytically about that experience. We do also look for skills of verbal analysis and description. So essentially this is gauging whether someone will do well in the essay writing parts of the course. So are you someone who can analyze something and construct an argument, either in speech, like in the interview, or more importantly in writing. So we do ask for writing samples. In terms of advice on admissions interviews, I'm afraid that my first piece of advice is kind of perhaps obvious and certainly easy for me to say, which is try to relax and approach it as a kind of intellectual conversation. And I do realise it's easy for me to say, don't be nervous. I'm actually not advising you to not be nervous. I know that's hard to control. But rather I would say, if you are a bit nervous facing an interview, accept that that's okay and sort of natural, and that interviewers are actually very used to seeing applicants deal with some nerves. They're used to sort of trying to talk them through that and still have a good conversation. So it's not something to worry about or feel badly about. I think often the best approach is to try and focus as much as you can on the questions or discussion prompts that you're given, and think about what is actually interesting about them to you. Sort of what sorts of ideas or other questions do they lead you to think about? So if you can connect with that sort of genuine interest in the subject in your interview, that's likely to help it go well, and to help interviewers see why you might be a good fit for the course. A lot of the teaching here is in small groups, either small language classes or these tutorials, these sort of focused discussion sessions. So ideally we're looking for people who will really enjoy and benefit from that sort of setting and that kind of approach to learning through conversation. So this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be somebody who talks a lot and very confidently. It could mean that, enthusiastic extroverts and verbal processors are very welcome, but also people who are maybe sort of quiet or shy and choose their words carefully, but also listen carefully and can use that sort of exchange of a conversation to build up a new angle on the topic. So I think the tutorial format is a good match for various kinds of learning styles. And we want to sort of get a sense for whether you can engage with a problem and think your way through it in that sort of format. So I would not be surprised if in an interview you're given some general questions, maybe about your interest in the course, but also some sort of specific prompt or maybe a short bit of reading or something to think about as a discussion prompt. So if that does happen, I think it's worth noting that there's unlikely to be a right answer or a single right way to analyse it, and that really isn't the point at all. It's more of an exercise to see how do you think your way through a new topic or engage with a new piece of information you're given, and how do you respond to our questions and kind of build on anything that comes out of the discussion. I think one of the lovely aspects of the Oxford College system is that it really does provide a space where academics or sort of tutors and postgraduates and undergraduates can all sort of participate in this single intellectual community across lines of subject or discipline as well. So I think Queen's is a wonderful environment for that type of intellectual exchange and learning, and if that appeals to you, you're very welcome. So I look forward to meeting many of you in due course.